This episode was made possible by our patrons, Julie Gray, Bree Smith, Robin Brown, Jan-Elise Cannon, Jamie Lang, Valerie Jacobson, Maria Sanchez, Chantel Oliver, Heather McKinnon, Jill Harrigan, Michaela Frew, Caitlin McTaggart, and Eric and Carolyn Shumway. Thank you so much for being our sponsors. We couldn't do it without you. Hi, Olivia.
Hi, Katie.
It's April 1900, and Ireland is preparing for a royal visit from Queen Victoria herself.
Ooh.
School children have prepared lovely songs. The streets of Dublin are festooned with garlands, military parades, hand-painted banners. There's a real sense of anticipation because Victoria is 81 years old. And she's never visited Ireland before, even though Ireland has been part of the British Empire for centuries.
Mm-hmm.
On the big day, word gets out that the United Irishman newspaper is publishing an explosive article condemning Victoria and her visit.
What?
And of course, this will not stand. Everybody loves Victoria. And her eternal reign. The British government seizes the paper, destroys every copy, and the lovely, wholesome royal visit carries on without a hitch. Long live the Queen! But drafts of that explosive article were also sent to America, and American newspapers published it. So I went and found it.
Ooh.
Shall we read a bit of it?
Yes.
The Famine Queen by Maud Gonne.
Ooh.
In truth, for Victoria, in the decrepitude of her 81 years, to have decided, after an absence of half a century, to revisit the country she hates, whose inhabitants are the victims of the criminal policy of her reign, the political necessity must have been terribly strong, for after all she is a woman, and however vile, selfish, and pitiless her soul, she must sometimes tremble as death approaches, when she thinks of the countless Irish mothers who, shelterless and watching their starving ones, have cursed her before they died.
Wow.
But she doesn't stop there. Every eviction during the 63 years has been carried out in Victoria's name. And if there is justice in heaven, the shame of those poor Irish emigrant girls, whose very innocence renders them an easy prey, and who have been overcome in the terrible struggle for existence on a foreign shore, will fall on this woman, whose bourgeois virtue is so boasted, and in whose name their homes were destroyed. Amazing.
Well, that could not be more perfectly calibrated as the most devastating attack possible on everything Victoria brands herself as.
Everything, exactly. And here's her final sentence. Taking the shamrock in her withered hand, she dares to ask Ireland for soldiers to protect the exterminators of their race.
Wow. Go, Maud!
I know. And that is Maud Gonne. She is known as the Irish Joan of Arc. And she stood tall in the year 1900 in her attempt to lead Ireland into revolution. She's an icon in Ireland, exactly as Joan of Arc is an icon of nationalist France. But the interesting thing is, nowadays she's not known for any of that. It's like, here's what happened to Maud Gonne, historically speaking. Imagine if Joan of Arc, 1 century down the line, became famous for, I don't know, like her nail polish or a duke that she hung out with a lot. That's what's happened to the legacy of Maud Gonne. Mm-hmm. She was the rallying figure of Irish independence at the turn of the 20th century. And now she is famed as a muse.
Of course.
It's the man she's associated with.
Our greatest achievement As a sex.
And she is famed for inspiring the works of none other than WB Yeats. The famous
Oh! Oh!
So she's known as his muse.
That's
and that is
her. Okay.
And today, with the help of writer Orna Ross, we are going to put Maud Gonne back where she belongs, which is right up there among the founding mothers of modern Ireland. I just marvel at this moment in time because you have, like you said, you have Queen Victoria, who's this model of perfect womanhood.
Children and virtue and safety.
And Christmas trees. And yeah. And then you have Maud Gonne, who, as we shall see, lived a life of scandal. Both of them were female leaders in a man's world, leading their nations by example. And what I love about Maud Gonne is that even though she's called the Irish Joan of Arc, and she's a beacon for Irish independence, over the years, she realized that violence is not the way. Her multi-generational story of, I think, enlightenment and legacy of peace is a surprising and beautiful ending. I'm Katie Nelson.
And I'm Olivia Mickle.
And this is What's Her Name?
Fascinating women you've never heard of.
Allow me to introduce a woman who has been writing about Maud Gonne for decades.
I'm Orna Ross. I'm a novelist and poet. I have an MA in women's history, and I started writing novels about 20 years ago or so. And just over 10 years ago, I took all my rights back from all my publishers and became an independent author and founded the Alliance of Independent Authors, which is now a global nonprofit which has members all over the world.
Orna Ross has, over the past 20 years, written 3 books about Maud Gonne. But the deeper she gets, the more there is to tell. And so her latest book, A Life Before, launched a Kickstarter 2 days ago, with the profits benefiting a campaign to put up a statue of Maud Gonne in Dublin.
Oh, yay!
All Irish kids hear about Maud Gonne, but they hear about her as the muse of WB Yeats. And I was a very moony teenager, and I loved Yeats the minute I heard all these wonderful poems. And I took her as through his lens, first of all, if you like. And when I went to university myself, I got really interested in women's history. That period of time is hugely interesting to me. Turn of the 20th century, Ireland was so alive at that time, such an interesting place. I learned about her in her own right and found out, of course, that she's an amazing activist, always on the side of the underdog. Wherever there was somebody to be cared for and comforted and advocated for, she went. She was an independent thinker, and I think that's one of the reasons why she's such a great emblem for our age, because we, with intersectionality and complexity and ambiguity, we get all that. And she doesn't fit neatly into any box. And that's what I think makes her so inspiring for us.
Maud was born in 1866 to a sort of bohemian, travel-loving mother and a military father. And the Gonnes were from County Mayo, but her grandfather had sort of sought his fortune abroad trading Spanish wines.
Her mother died when she was 5 years old, and her father was an army man, and so she was an army orphan, essentially, as they used to be called in those days. Herself and her sister Kathleen, who was 2 years younger, were farmed out to their relatives, their English relatives, who were very much of the Victorian ilk. They had a nurse and a Republican French governess who kind of fostered Maud's love of learning, first of all, and love of culture and literature, but also her independence. Madame was fierily French independent. So she mentions that in her own autobiography as being a very important influence in her life. So when Maud was roughly 19 and Kathleen was 17, Tommy got a staff post finally in the army. In Ireland, he got a high-ranking post as a colonel.
She's 19. She's entered society. She's back in Ireland, and the expected life path, of course, if you're a Victorian middle-class lady and you're 19, is that you will attend the balls and you will find the suitable husband and you will be a good Victorian domestic.
Mm-hmm.
But the west of Ireland has been through it, and Maud heads out to witness it.
So she went and stayed in awful places, really, for someone of her background. Donegal, Mayo. When I say awful places, they're beautiful, gorgeous places. But what I mean is she stayed in cabins, in shebeens, in places where there wasn't running water, cold, wet, miserable winter conditions, and spoke to the people, for the people.
She's shocked by these conditions. She's like, what has happened here? What has been going on through the whole of the 1800s? Well, that's a story, isn't it? The whole of the 1800s in Ireland, not a good time. The Great Famine hit in 1845. And we've all heard about the potato blight and the devastating results, of course. 1 million starved to death. 1 million left Ireland. But the root of the problem is so much deeper than a potato blight. Really, it was centuries of British colonization of Ireland.
What?
Here's the gist of it in 30 seconds or less. Since Britain was trying to force the Irish to become Protestant, they established penal laws. And if you're Catholic, you cannot own land. So you will be a renter for your whole life, beholden to the prices set by your wealthy, absentee Protestant landlords. I feel like a lot of millennials and Gen Z can relate to this situation. You cannot train in a profession. You can't hold public office. You can't educate your children. You obviously can't vote. You can't possess weapons or arms. You can't speak Irish. You're banned from adopting orphans. You can't build churches. So you get the idea.
Yeah.
So there's basically no way to claw your way out of poverty if you choose to remain Catholic. And during the famine, when the Irish were literally starving to death over the course of 3 years, the British government refused to send any aid at all. Their policy was, you simply must be more self-reliant. Then, a couple decades later, so like in the 1870s, the landlords evicted people by the thousands. And then the people who were evicted turned on the new renters of that property. So it was this brutal, hateful time known as the Land War, which really doesn't do justice to how horrific it was. And she's out there in the west of Ireland witnessing all of it.
She saw more evictions and became really quite radicalized in terms of supporting the poor.
She goes back to her father in Dublin and is like, Dad, this is really not right. We have to do something about it. And he says, let's go into politics.
Oh, he actually listened to her?
Yeah, he actually seems like a pretty cool guy.
Her relationship with her father is fascinating. And Tommy was quite disillusioned with the army and he made a decision to leave. And he was going to go into politics and she was going to support him in that. But he died at a very young age, 50 years old only. He was a vigorous, soldierly type man. But they knew they had a problem with the Liffey River. The sewage used to back up into the barracks and he got typhus and died.
She's not yet 21.
He died at the beginning of December and by Christmas Eve all his stuff was sold. So she went off to England and had no reason ever to visit Ireland again.
Shipped off to her Uncle William in England, whom she hates. He's her personal nemesis.
Yeah.
He makes it very clear that she now needs to marry post-haste.
And Uncle William had told her that they had no money as a way to try and control her, really. She decided to go on the stage, probably because that is the thing that would most annoy Uncle William.
Off to the stage to become an actress? Take that, Uncle William. except
that did not work out. It was a disaster. An English touring company, she couldn't hack it. She had to buy her way out of breach of contract.
Oh.
And so she goes back to him with her tail between her legs. She has no money.
And then he confessed that actually she was going to become a very rich woman at the age of 21. I mean, it's phenomenally rich on her mother's side in particular. So she inherited millions by today's standards, and she was 21 years old, and she decided to go to her favourite aunt in France.
She goes off to France to fight the good fight.
And there she met the love of her life, Lucien Millevoye. He was a right-wing politician, and he had a lot of influence on her, and he suggested, why be on the stage? Make Ireland your stage. Become Ireland's Joan of Arc. You help me in my fight to regain Alsace-Lorraine from the Germans, and I'll help you in your fight to regain Ireland from the English. And they formed this alliance, and they had a sexual relationship as well. And so she put herself completely outside of her class and her family and everything. And she had great adventures at first with Lucien and went on assignments to St. Petersburg and various other places.
So she's like, let's get Irish independence started already. In searching for those who are also for the cause of Irish independence, she crosses paths with the Romantic poet WB Yeats in the west of Ireland.
She called to his house famously, and he fell in love with her immediately and spent a week in his company straight afterwards, and the two of them had a lot in common. She also was pulling in other activists and getting to know everybody she could. And some of the people were very suspicious of her and saw her as English.
Lots of Irish people won't accept her as one of them because she's too posh. Her accent is weird. She was Irish but raised in France by a French nanny. And also, maybe her biggest problem, she's just too beautiful.
Haven't even mentioned the famous beauty. She was 6'2", apparently, masses of red, golden hair. She had a beautiful face, undoubtedly, but apparently it was her presence. She's absolutely impossible to ignore. And also one of these people who, when she's with you, gives you 100% of her attention. So she makes you feel amazing. And she'd all these guys literally drooling right and left. You can read numerous over-the-top descriptions of how they felt about her, from Douglas Hyde, who went on to be the first president of Ireland, a very hardened journalist here in the UK, Steed, who called her the most beautiful woman in the world. My head was spinning with her beauty. Everybody spoke about it. But also women loved her because she wasn't really a man's woman. She very much knew about the attention, but she completely ignored it and was above it. It never went to her head. She's in her 20s now. She's living in France. She's pregnant with her first child.
Now, and she's not actually married to Millevoye because it turns out he's really a ladies' man and he has all kinds of ladies. So this is scandalous, especially for those conservative, Catholic Irish families in the West. So she's totally dedicated her life to this cause, but also she's not living those Irish Catholic values. So she keeps the child a complete secret.
Yeah, she's pregnant and she's hiding it, and she has that son, and George is his name, and she's beginning to write. Yeats helps to publicise her in the UK, but she's such an unusual person because so young, so beautiful. She appeared to be almost like this virgin queen type of character as she went about. People were dying to have her come to speak at their event. So she very quickly took off. She had phenomenal energy. All of that was going on, and then tragedy struck. Her little son died while she was in Ireland on a tour, electioneering. And she was ferociously guilty, and any working mom can identify with that. She left very suddenly, went back to France, and he died of meningitis, 1.5 years old, and she was absolutely devastated. She lost the ability to speak French for a while, and it was a few months later she came to Ireland dressed all in black, and by coincidence arrived on the same boat that was bringing back the body of the dead, Charles Stewart Parnell, who was one of the great Land League leaders in Ireland.
An Irish land war hero named Charles Stewart Parnell, and his coffin is on the same ship that she arrives on. And everybody sees her get off that same boat, and she's so dramatically dressed in black. They're like, oh, please.
Thought it was overly dramatic, and she was gone into extravagant mourning for Parnell, but it was actually for her son.
But it's really for her son that she can't tell anybody even existed.
Oh.
So she was really devastated. Willie Yeats writes of that time how all her beauty was gone. She was ashen and she was incoherent with sorrow.
And Yeats says to her, have you encountered this new religion called spiritualism?
Oh.
You may be able to speak to your dear departed child and achieve some semblance of peace. So the two of them together, they become absolutely devoted to spiritualism. It's the fastest growing religion in the world.
Yeah.
Millions of believers constantly attempting to contact the other side.
They both were skeptical believers who constantly cited planets and astral flying and seances and every kind of spiritualism, table tapping. They tried it all and did it all, but were constantly questioning it at the same time. And he brought her to meet A.E., another very well-known Irish writer, George Russell, and the two of them explained to her the principle of reincarnation and sex magic, and how if you had sex on the tomb of the dead person, their soul would enter the, well, you get the picture. So she organized it. Lucian and herself did the deed in George's mausoleum, and she thought he was going to be the reincarnation of George. The fact that she had a daughter came as a surprise.
The new child is supposed to be George reborn, but it's a girl. She names her Isolde. And like her lifelong relationship with Isolde is really complicated.
Yeah.
And Millevoix has become, he was a philanderer, and he is becoming increasingly libertine and very obvious in his carry-on.
So it's over with Millevoix. Ireland is her home now. She's working with all these men who will become icons of the Irish Revolution later. And these are all names that every Irish person has heard of.
Became very friendly with James Connolly at this time, with Arthur Griffith, who went on to be very significant in the Irish independence movement.
So these are the George Washington and Thomas Jeffersons of the Irish independence movement. And she's the Maud Gonne of the Irish independence movement. She's right there in it. Political theory, you know. What is the best way to break free? Are we going to do it diplomatically? Are we going to start a war? Is violence the only answer against these people who have occupied Ireland for coming up on 800 years? You know, there's so much to talk about. There's so much to plan. There's so much to fund, which she does personally. And she also says, look, there's people to feed. What we need to do right now is at least make sure they don't starve to death first. Then let's set up a free, independent, secular Ireland with rights for women, votes for all citizens, regardless of whether they own property or not. She's setting up soup kitchens everywhere, especially in the West where everyone's suffering. She's starting school lunch programs. She brought food and medicine to prisoners. She's boots on the ground. She is seeing firsthand the victims of the British Empire. She knows all the stories. She's meeting all the people. Now, Yeats is launching a movement to awaken Irish identity, Irish nationalism. It's called the Celtic Revival. This is the movement where they're like, what does it mean to be Irish? Oh, well, it can't be anything in the last 500 years because that has British entanglement. We're going to reach all the way back to the Celts. And we're going to say, that's our roots. We are Celtic. So he believes stories are the way to rally the people. He opens a theatre with this other famous woman in Irish history, Lady Gregory, the Abbey Theatre. And they're writing new plays and they're telling new stories of Irishness. And Maud Gonne is selected to play the most famous woman in the most famous play. She's Kathleen, an allegorical representation of Ireland. It was this massive hit. It made her instantly famous. That same year, she converted to Catholicism, seeing that it was inextricably wrapped up entirely with the Irish cause.
But she was the kind of Roman Catholic that believed in weeping pictures and moving statues. So she kept the magic bit as well.
Yeats, who was ever and always in love with Maud, he proposed marriage many times. She always refused him. And one of the reasons she cites was that he refused to become Catholic. He said he was miserable without her. And this is what she's most famous for, is for refusing Yeats over and over again. Like, that's her most famous action in her life. She wrote this: "You make beautiful poetry out of what you call your unhappiness. And so you are happy in that."
Oh, that's a deep cut. That is a deep cut.
And then she says, "Marriage would be such a dull affair. Poets should never marry. The world should thank me for not marrying you."
Wow.
But she is an unwed mother in Catholic Ireland.
So people are aware of her daughter's existence. This isn't a hidden child.
Oh yeah, Isolde is, I think officially she says that it's an adopted child, but everybody who knows her knows the truth.
She can't adopt a child. She's Catholic.
She's Catholic? Yes! So she needs to get married. Enter a war hero from the Boer Wars, John McBride, recently returned from what we now know to be a horrific war in South Africa. He's bathed in glory because he fought against the British. He sided with the Boers because any enemy of the British Empire is a friend of Ireland. So he fought with the Boers against the British. He's a hero for the cause, as is Maud Gonne, because she's played Kathleen Houlihan in the play. Like, they are the two icons of Ireland. It was a match made in heaven.
And anyway, Maud set her cap at him and thought, we'll have another political alliance, and this time it'll be the two people at the head of the Irish independence movement.
He wasn't allowed in Ireland, being the obvious enemy of England, so they met in Paris.
And so they married. And it was an immediate disaster.
You know what would be a great symbolic thing to do on our honeymoon? Assassinate the King of England.
What?
Victoria's dead now, and her son, Edward VII, is king. It's going to be the great symbolic thing.
All of this stuff makes for great fiction writing. They didn't assassinate King Edward VII. John got drunk, and
she carried him home.
The honeymoon night was spent removing his boots and putting him into bed. And when he was drunk, he was quite violent, and he was a soldier and had all of the trauma that goes with being a soldier. And he had the Irish disease of alcoholism, and it was all quite shocking to her.
She got pregnant pretty quickly. She had a son, Sean, but this relationship was not good.
And then she was away doing her work, and when she got back to her household, she was met by Madame Avril, who was a friend of hers who used to take care of the household while she was away, and she said that Isolde had told her that McBride had abused her. So there was a very public separation and divorce case. Everything broke out and became public, and it was awful. Nobody won. The judge didn't find in anybody's favour. He essentially said Maud was granted her separation, but not a divorce.
In the end, nationalist Ireland took his side. He went home in glory and helped lead the nationalist movement.
Willie Yeats supported her completely through the divorce, was a really fantastic friend to her.
She tried to return to Ireland. she would like go to plays at the Abbey Theatre where she had been made famous and played all these important roles. And when she walked down the aisle just to take her seat in the audience, the whole audience would hiss at her. So this is social and political ruin.
Wow.
So she essentially set up her life in France. She withdrew, very much bitten and feeling bruised and battered by the whole experience. MacLeod moved to Dublin, got a job and settled himself into the nationalist community.
I think she has sunk to her very lowest. Ireland chose MacBride, not her. Her life's work is a failure. Throughout her life, I think she never felt good enough. Always something to prove. Always something to strive for, to try to live up to, you know, just like trying to earn your right to even exist. That's Maud Gonne.
She had that sort of outsider kind of feeling about her always. She was always striving, always struggling, always working, always, and never feeling quite good enough. And you could get that sense of how she over-dramatized things, told exaggerations, even outright fibs at times to make herself look more amazing, which she totally didn't need to do because she was totally amazing as she was.
She goes to that dark place. She does the work. She turns outward instead of inward. How can I help? There are millions of ways to help. There are millions of suffering people, not just in Ireland, but everywhere.
And out of her trauma, she created amazing things. Quietly doing sort of activism like children's meals or supporting the poor of Paris during the floods.
And again, she's boots on the ground, helping those who are suffering in France. And at the same time, she starts a newspaper called Free Ireland. She's the editor, she's the publisher, she's often writing the entire thing. She wants to get Geneva's attention, she wants the cause of Irish independence to be seen, and she wants women's voices to be leading the way. And people heard her. They listened. In Ireland, they formed an organization called the Daughters of Erin, who published an editorial saying exactly what Maud Gonne was saying in her newspaper. Here's their proclamation. Our desire to have a voice in directing the affairs of Ireland is not based on the failure of men to do so properly, but is the inherent right of women as loyal citizens and intelligent souls. Maud Gonne is saying, hey world, listen to the women of Ireland. She's also deeply suspicious of lots of organized groups out there in society, and she was very vocal about it, especially if she perceived the group to support the British Empire, then they are her arch nemesis. So nowadays, taken out of the context of her life, things that she says about the Masons or Jewish fraternities and things like that, they're like, oh, this is... Yeah, you can't touch Maud Gonne with a 10-foot pole because of these things that she said, which we now have labels for. She and her words can be taken as all kinds of prejudice these days. She's complex, as we say, and her morals are her own. I think she automatically hated any organization that supported the British Empire, but there's lots of opinions out there, and opinions about her opinions. History is not about judging, it's about understanding. World War I broke out, and there she is in Paris. Suffering is happening all around her. She takes Isolde, who's now 20, and they become nurses on the front of World War I. 2 years this war is going on. She's there in Paris, as is Mata Hari, which is such a fascinating overlap.
And Maud Fitch.
And Maud Fitch scrambling to try to get there in order to drive ambulances. Amazing.
Wow.
While she's on a break, home at Easter 1916, the papers arrive, and that's how she finds out about the rising.
She read in the papers that it happened. It actually happened. The rising that she has been talking about and planning and dreaming of and even like funding for years.
She who would have been so central to the movement just 10 years before.
It happened, but it had not happened, hadn't ended well, though. And there were all kinds of mishaps even before it began, so that it was sort of doomed from the start.
And so the 1916 Rising, where a small group of poets and artists and other rebels took over positions in Dublin and in other parts of Ireland, striking at Britain when it was occupied in the war with Germany. It was a great symbolic gesture at Easter, resurrection, rising, and blood sacrifice to die and be reborn, all of which spoke completely to her. But she reads in the papers, which are sent to her by friends, about the rising.
So she's reading it in the paper. They did it. Who's involved? What happened? You know, who actually pulled this off? And she reads the name John McBride, her husband.
He was pulled in on the day. He was actually on his way to a wedding when he heard what was happening, and he went to one of the outposts and took command there. And he was arrested, as were all the leaders, and he was executed for his part in the rising, as were 14 others. So this is how she reads that she's lost her husband and loads of her friends, her closest, dearest friends in Ireland, and she's frantic. I have to get back to Ireland, but it's the First World War and you can't get a travel permit. And the last person they would want coming into Ireland is Maud Gonne McBride. She wants to be part of it. And so she does what she always does when she needs something or is in trouble. She calls Willie, and he knows a lot of influential people, and maybe he can get her a permit, get her to Ireland.
This is the other weirdly famous part of her life, even though it's just a moment. Yeats proposes marriage again to Maud. She again says no. So he proposes marriage to Iseult, her 20-year-old daughter.
Her ex-lover flirting with her daughter. In 1917, then Yeats proposes to Iseult, and she nearly dies of shock. She can't believe it, but it seems so ridiculous to her. She keeps him on a string. She doesn't know what to do. And Iseult is a very different type of character to Maud. She's scholarly, spiritual, great reader, but she's what Maud calls indolent, which means she doesn't work hard. So she's dreamy. She likes going for long walks. She writes a bit. She thinks a lot. Philosophy, reads compulsively, all of that. But she's not a doer. Iseult just a chain smoker. She just doesn't seem to know what she wants to do with her life.
So Iseult sounds to me like a relatable millennial. She's watching her parents' lives unfold, and she's going like, I don't know which direction I am going to take in my life. It all feels so high stakes. I don't know what I want to do or be. And then this old poet tries to marry you because your mom won't marry him. Ick. Thankfully, like many millennials, Iseult is learning boundaries, I think. It takes a long time. She has to do a lot of, thinking and stalling and everything. But she says no to Yeats. She says no to her mom's schemes to get into Ireland. And eventually she goes, I'm out. And I'm not involved in your schemes anymore. Speaking of Maud's schemes to get to Dublin, she was briefly jailed at Holloway Prison. But Yeats, again, comes to her rescue. And then eventually her scheme, the way she gets into Dublin is to disguise herself as one of the Pankhursts, the suffragettes. She literally pretends to be her and then enters Ireland as her.
Wow.
Amazing.
Pretends she is going to be speaking at one of her suffragist meetings, and Maud and Sean get into disguise and go to Dublin. Over they go. Ireland is moving strongly into the Independence War. now, and Maud is very much part of it.
By 1921, the British are finally ready to sit down and make a deal. So the Easter Rising is 1916. So we're 5 years later of brutal fighting.
Little Ireland does bring the British Empire to a negotiation through a really bloody, horrible guerrilla war, and the negotiations start.
Maud and Yeats are like, it's happening! It's working! Our lifetime of struggle has come to this! But
Maud, as soon as she sees how things are actually shaping up, she sees, no, this is not right. This is moving in a direction I don't like at all. All the people who fought for freedom are not even going to get the vote. So the Free State is moving in quite an undemocratic way.
Tale as old as time. It's basically Huda Sharawi, Irish version. Step aside, ladies. You don't need citizenship. Yes, I know, Maud. I know you funded the whole thing. I know you've been involved from the start. Just sit over there and we will get to the lady things when we get to them. And also, all you desperate poor who have fought and died for the cause and lost everything for this freedom, don't worry. The elites will look out for your best interest. No, you won't have citizenship or the ability to vote or anything.
We won't be like those other landlords. We'll be different.
We'll be good. Yeah, exactly. So, of course, massive disillusionment.
And before long, we have a civil war between those who approve the treaty and those who do not. And Maud takes the anti-treaty side. And this is a very difficult time in Ireland, very bitter. It's just as the British executed the Irish, now the Irish execute the Irish. And there are reprisals. Women are treated appallingly in prisons. All sorts of things are happening. Maud is in the thick of it, speaking on the side pro-democracy against what she sees as absolute outrages. And that sets the tone for her life for the next 20 years, really.
Well, as it turned out, the horrific civil war ended with the partition of Ireland, where Northern Ireland was created, which remains in the UK, and the rest of Ireland was the Republic of Ireland. The seed of violence and hatred for the rest of the 20th century was planted in that move. But also, Ireland was independent, yes, but it wasn't at all the Ireland that Maud had dedicated her life and her resources and her heart to.
She leads a group of women that are called the Mothers through the streets of Dublin every single Sunday for years and years, protesting whatever the latest injustice is and fighting on the side of how she thinks Ireland should go.
She's fierce, but she's not angry. She's not out there being ragey, and she's not cruel. She's kind.
Everybody always says how kind she was. She shared a prison cell with Kathleen Clark, and Clark constantly spoke about how kind she was. Everybody did. It was a real feature of her personality.
She is engaging in this protest with love.
Of all the money that e'er I spent it in good company.
And now, this is where it's so fascinating. Her son, Sean. Imagine being Sean. Your parents are the martyr John McBride and the famed Maud Gonne. So a lifetime in politics is his destiny.
As Sean grows up, he's active in the IRA, but then he becomes more constitutional. He establishes a political party. And while she was very fiery in her youth, her experiences in the First World War had made a pacifist of her. And she and he had many conversations about peacemaking while fighting for justice. And so a new political party is formed by him and other people in Dublin. She supports that party. There's a lovely picture of her as an old woman voting for the party in that election. yeah, her life goes on, and she has her family and her friends around her, and she ages passionately, is the only way to describe it. Her passion doesn't ease a jot, even though the fieriness and the impulsiveness goes out of it. Eventually, she becomes ill and takes to her bed, writes her autobiography, and dies then at the age of 83 or 4 at home. And her last words were, "I feel now an ineffable joy."
Then fill to me the parting glass. Good night, and God be with you all.
What a life.
What a life. Absolutely. What a life. What I do love is that the passion never died. She stayed so passionate right to the end.
Sean McBride would go on to a hugely important international political career, founding, among other things, the UN Council of Human Rights, the Council of Europe, Amnesty International,
What?
the Organization of African Unity. Like, he founded these things. The best way to sum up his career is he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1974. And let me get the sentence. They said he is a man who mobilized the conscience of the world in the fight against injustice.
Wow.
Having lived through what he lived through, and his parents living through what they lived through, he understood not just injustice, but he understood violence. He understood hatred and what it can do, what it doesn't solve. Amazing arc, the two of these.
Wow.
Just these 2 generations. The Irish struggle for independence was long, violent, full of hate. But it's that arc of Irish history and the arc of Maud Gonne and her son Sean that I find so fascinating. They lived deeply through all of it. And so they could lead the rest of the world out of violence and toward peace.
God be with you all.
As a woman, I think her sisterly solidarity is something that also speaks very much to me. She understood women, and she, I think, associated women's social position very much with Ireland's national position. And that, I think that's where her own passion for Irish independence actually came from. As I worked on these novels, I became increasingly irate about the fact that she wasn't recognised for her own achievements in her own right, and that Ireland hadn't really honoured her in any sort of way. And then I found there were lots of other people who felt like that as well. So a group of us got together, readers and writers, artists and historians, and decided, let's right this wrong. There have always been reasons not to honour her. They change with every generation, but they all come from the same place. I just thought I would donate the profits from a beautiful deluxe special edition to the cause of setting up a campaign to get a statue for her in Dublin.
I love this. Just last time I was in Dublin, I was looking at the crowds of tourists looking at the statue of Molly Malone. But everybody visits that and just thinking, oh, if only it was a real woman with
An
a
actual
real story.
We have Molly Malone. I don't know if you know this, but in Dublin, Molly is called the tart with the heart.
Yes.
And we have 2 women shoppers sitting on a bench, and they're called the hags with the bags. And we had an Olivia from Joyce. She was called the floozy in the jacuzzi. She was a water fountain. They had to take her away because they kept peeing in her. But we have almost no historical women. It would be wonderful for people to see a real life historical woman on the streets of Dublin. she was in service. She was in service to what she believed in. Every action she took lived up to that. She made mistakes. She was very complex. Was she perfect? She was not. Loads of things about her that you could question. Even though she had a very privileged background, she had a very tough upbringing in the sense of loneliness and never feeling quite good enough and always feeling different. But she was in service with her whole being at all times. And I think I find that incredibly inspiring.
Special thanks to Orna Ross for bringing us the story of Maud Gonne. If you would like to participate in the new Kickstarter campaign, get a special edition of her new book, and contribute to the cause to put up a statue in Dublin, check the show notes or head to our website, What'sHerNamePodcast.com. There you can also find all the information about the music featured in this episode, which was composed by Andy Reiner and John Sousa on their album Canyon Sunrise, E's Jammy Jams, Jesse Gallagher, Doug Maxwell, Wayne Jones, Kevin MacLeod, Audionautix, and Daniel Foster Smith. Our intern is Katie Boucher. Did you know we have lists of recommended reads for different geographical locations in our bookshop.org bookshop? You might want to check out our Ireland reading list. Thank you so much for donating. Thanks for listening.